Good afternoon, and welcome back to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where your team needs it most. My name is Meryl Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA, and I'm very excited to welcome you all to a very special edition of our Service Solutions series today, being presented by the team at ImEPIK. If you're just joining us, please stay on the lookout for housekeeping and orientation notes to be passed along via the chat window, so we're not taking up any more valuable time with routine info. But if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to pose them to either myself, Meryl Gilbert, or my colleague, Brooke Gilbert, inside the chat window at any point. Now, let's get this show on the road. In today's Service Solutions program, our panel of experts will discuss why food safety programs are important for those making edibles, even though they're not federally required yet. ImEPIK has pulled together a unique group of experts who will cover the importance of good manufacturing practices in the United States and good production practices in Canada, as well as certification standards and training options available to those throughout the cannabis industry. We have a lot of information to cover and a very important topic to explore, so let's not waste any more time. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome the moderator of today's session to the virtual stage. Before we get started, why don't I tell the audience a little bit more about your background and expertise before turning it over to kick things off. Moderating today's session, we have Patricia Wester, president of PA Wester Consulting. In her firm, Patricia utilizes her broad experience in food safety testing and accredited certification auditing to support her food industry client base. All right, we've primed our participants with the background they need before diving into the program. So why don't you take it away from here, Trish, by introducing the rest of our esteemed panelists from across the food safety sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian, and welcome to everyone to today's session. My name is Patricia Wester, as Brian indicated, and I'm going to go through a brief introduction to our panel. Joining us will be Dr. Kathy Knudsen from ImEPIK, David Valancourt from GMP Collection. I'm sorry, I'm having to read way across the thing. So David, you want to take a minute and talk a little bit about the topics you can cover for us today?
Sure. Morning, Tricia, Patricia, and everybody here. David Valancourt, founder and CEO of the GMP Collective, part of this Rockstar panel. We provide service solutions in terms of consulting, pre-audit certification assistance, SOP technical writing, and general training for the cannabis industry, transcending pharmaceutical, food, and dietary supplements into the cannabis industry.
Thanks, David. Kathy, you want to talk a little bit about ImEPIK?
I do. Hi, Trish. Hi, panelists. And I want to do a shout out to Darwin, David, Trevor. Good to see you on board here. I'm feeling like you could take over at any moment and do the presentation as well. I have worked with ImEPIK for 2 years as a curriculum writer. My expertise is FDA regulation on the food side and also on education in general. Love to educate adults, I like to say, not so crazy about those high school students. So I'm very happy to be here with you, and we'll dive more into me a little bit later. Meryl, I think, yeah, go ahead.
We'll bring up, and last we have Meryl Gilbert with Trace Trust joining us as a panelist today. So welcome, Meryl. You want to just mention briefly?
Yes, thank you. I am the co-founder and CEO of Trace Trust, and we entered into the world of legal cannabis back in 2016 and come from, like most of this panelists, with strong backgrounds in food safety and third-party audits. And so, you know, we found that the biggest risk to the industry was going to be unpredictable experiences. And so we really have been leading the way in unifying all of our collective vision around food safety and establishing what we like to call edibles, credible edibles. And more importantly, You know, we really have built these third-party audit processes at True Dose and HGMP for hemp-derived products that really are ahead of FDA, which is what we're trying to gather here today, right? And
That's great.
we believe that this future administration is going to lead us into a much more broader legal world. And with that, you know, we want to use the expertise that all of us come with to guide safety standards and good manufacturing practices.
Thanks. Now, there was one other panelist to be with us today, Dr. Catherine Birmingham, whom I've known for a very, very long time, and actually need to give a nod to her for inviting me to actually moderate such a great panel. Unfortunately, Catherine's husband was recently tested positive with COVID, which is something I'm sure we're all familiar with hearing more often than we care to. The good news is, although symptomatic, he appears to be doing fairly well, and Catherine sends her regards to everyone. But the panel will certainly be able to answer any questions and fill in for Catherine's participation. I see we have the results from the first poll. So we do have a good portion of the audience from the edibles industry. So the food safety information shared today on GMPs and general food safety will certainly be of good value to our attendees. As we move into the program, I'm going to quit talking as a moderator because you really don't need to hear from me so much. And I'm going to open to Kathy for some introductory comments and kind of guiding us along what we'll focus on today, what some of the areas are. And so with that, Kathy, I will turn it off to you. And
okay. Thank you, Trish. Thank you very much. It's really interesting seeing all this chat come through too as well. So I'm doing a little multitasking here, which is fun. But in that first poll question about what area you work in the cannabis industry, what we were looking for there is the full seed to sale spectrum and how GMPs potentially can be applied at each one of those steps. So as I mentioned, I'm from the food industry originally. My expertise is in food safety, microbiology. And so in the food industry, we have the concept of farm to fork, whereas in cannabis industry, it's seed to sale. And so what we want to do is we do want to make that an analogous concept that we want to control safety, not only at the manufacturing of edibles, at that one part of the cannabis industry, but all the way back to cultivation, into extraction, then into manufacturing of the edibles, and forward in being able to provide that safe edible product or that safe tincture to the consumers who are at the sale end of the seed to sale. So as mentioned in Canada, if you are following the regulation in Canada, there is the Cannabis Act, which allows the legal sale of cannabis products. And over on that side in Canada, they have the term GPP, which is good production practices. And so their good production practices are very similar to our GMPs, good manufacturing practices. And then both Canada and the United States, we go all the way back to the concept of GAP, which is good agricultural practices. And so when we're looking at developing the cannabis industry and we're looking at applying the science of what is going to work at each one of these steps, there already is so much developed. And so the cannabis industry should steal at every moment possible to take what already has been made available in the industries that we are similar to. And to that point, I do want to mention that NCIA has a wonderful white paper about the 4 lanes of proposed regulation in the United States. and it was published. If you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to get it. It was published October 1st, 2019, so a little less than 1.5 years ago. And as is predictable, the discussion is around how is federal regulation of cannabis products going to look. And so once we get beyond, sorry, let me back up there a second. So we look at FDA already regulating pharmaceutical program or pharmaceutical products. We already have FDA regulating dietary supplements and food. And so we know FDA is going to be heavily involved at the federal level for regulation. But then we get into a lot of other federal agencies. So we have the IRS for banking taxation, OSHA for worker safety, EPA for water and for pesticide application, and USDA for cultivation. So we don't know what the full picture is going to look like yet, but we do know that FDA is going to be heavily involved. And so to that point, we want to prepare for FDA regulation as much as possible. And under FDA regulation, GMPs are not optional. And the cannabis industry has grown greatly from the concept of not only what are GMPs, just being familiar with the term itself as good manufacturing practices, but then diving into GMPs for pharmaceutical, GMPs for dietary supplement, and GMPs for food. So my key point right here in the introduction is that GMP compliance is not optional. We must implement GMP compliance. I would like to quickly go to the next slide, please, which is an ImEPIK production. And there we go. Okay. So in the writing of curricula for ImEPIK, ImEPIK hosts a 100% online training courses. Just getting a little pop up out of my view here. What we did, I worked really closely with Dr. Catherine Birmingham, who wasn't able to be with us today. And we developed this pyramid of edible safety as a visual orientation to building your programs. So if you, no matter where you are, even if you're, and that's why we looked at that continuum of seed to sale. No matter where you are, you can hop in here and apply this information. So on the very bottom in the gray foundation is the prerequisite programs for your business operations. And this may include things like hiring practices, your purchasing agreements, and your purchasing policies. Nothing real too much related to the safety of your product. Then we get into a layer where we have our good cannabis practices, which is a term that ImEPIK has coined, good manufacturing practices on the state side or good production practices on the Canadian side. And here in the United States, we can look to the regulations that already exist for dietary supplements, which is 21 CFR 111. And for food, if we are looking up the GMPs, we go to 21 CFR 117, subpart B, and then record keeping is in subpart F. Building upon those GMPs, we have hazard analysis. And so many of you are comfortable with the term HACCP, hazard analysis and critical control points, either from a food service operation, a food operation, or the cannabis operation that you're in now. And you may have developed a HACCP plan at some point in your career, or you help others in your career to develop those HACCP plans. That would include what we call now, as part of the FDA regulation, 21 CFR 117, process preventive controls, building upon what was the concepts for HACCP and the implementation of HACCP, FDA added on preventive controls for allergen, sanitation, and supply chain. A lot of us are working with those types of programs in our jobs as well to bring in safe ingredients and control the safety of the product within our facility. Once we get up to the very tippy top, we would have a written recall plan. And once you've made it through all of those layers is what we call an edible safety plan. And it is one thing to write an edible safety plan. It is a completely different animal to actually implement it, review the results, review the program, deal with corrective action. And my friends Meryl and Dave will speak more to that. Poll question number 2, please.
All right, we've got that poll up. Like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, make sure to participate in every poll if you want a chance to win a free month of NCIA basic level membership.
Great. So all my friends in the cannabis industry come from somewhere else. It's very rare to find someone who did not work in a previous industry sector. Myself, I get the first one up on the list, which is food manufacturing. So I'm a food scientist. Just real briefly, and then I want to pass it off to Meryl to do the same thing. My background included dipping my toe into the cannabis pool in 2017. So I haven't been into the cannabis industry for very long. And then I jumped into the pool in 2018 by publishing a series of articles that are publicly available on cannabisindustryjournal.com. And at the end of 2018, I attended what is now known as the Cannabis Quality Conference. And there I met a woman who was a consultant helping the cannabis industry with writing and implementation of GMPs. And so I followed up with her only in 2019. It was less than 2 years ago now. And I will always remember in this conversation that she said to me, that if FDA inspected any one of her clients' facilities, they would fail the GMP inspection. And that just shocked me. And I was still on my learning curve about the cannabis industry, and I forever will be on the learning curve, but I know so much more than I did 2 years ago. And so I hope now where we're at in the cannabis industry that people are coming to recognize the importance of GMPs, not only from what I've already stated, get ready, FDA is coming, but it is the right thing to do. So we're going to talk more about that. And just kind of to wrap this up, I've said it once, I just want to say it again more clearly. If you are new to the arena of GMPs in cannabis, or if you're new to cannabis, just know that there are separate FDA GMPs for the pharmaceutical industry, separate from the dietary supplement industry, separate from the food industry. And all of us working in this area, we're trying to pull out and marry all of the important parts of that. So Meryl, I want to jump off to you and have you explain your background that brought you to the cannabis industry.
Thank you. That was such a great kickoff in explaining what we want to talk about today. And for me, I could click off several on that list. Strong background in food and beverage operations and from every sector of that. So a really complete background in everything from startups to full service, multi-serve, from quick serve to fine dining to hotels. But all of that also led to a very strong commitment early on in the beginnings of talks in that farm to table experience, right? In sustainable and in the future of food, and where do all of those things come to? And always being forward thinking. So, again, I spent a lot of time on the food production side from that perspective, and bringing products from literally, if you want to grow it and put it in a box, put it on a plate, put it on a shelf, along that entire supply chain process, and understanding that. So those things clearly led, and particularly going from the food service into retail markets, every industry that you mentioned all have to be able to reliably produce documentation of good manufacturing processes. And so that really, as I said, became the foundation of how my business partner and I came together, because she is a HACCP trainer, she is a food safety auditor, and she does write a lot of policy and background in these implementations. So when we came together, it really was under the premise that we were going to create these beautiful plant-based edibles, low dose and multi, be able to replicate in other states. And we had so many ideas. And then the sophistication of just how the plant has evolved and how we continue now that we have a wider, more not just national, but global research and access to plant and understanding the cannabinoid system. Those all really became very important. And how do we make these experiences reliable? How do new and returning people coming into cannabis for the first time know what they're going to get? And so it wasn't just as simple, and we're still fighting this, right? We're fighting destigmatization, that it's okay to be a soccer mom, it's okay to be an athlete, it's okay to be somebody in recovery, it's okay to be suffering something in pain. And we certainly learned in the world of COVID, the natural anxieties that we are all facing on a daily basis. So all of these things, become experiential and need states. And so what's exciting where we are is that we're not just coming in our world, in the majority of us in this conversation, from the food, but the pharmaceutical, the nutraceutical, the agricultural, the business. This is the most exciting time ever to be coming into. I see there's several people that are just exploring and new to this. And so all the skill sets, hiring practices, training and development, all of these things come very clearly into what we're doing. And so when we talk about good manufacturing, it's really all of those steps. And it is very segmented because it has to be structured towards what you are creating and what you're producing, whether you're growing it. So on the whole cultivation side of that, to the manufacturing, the extraction levels, which includes so many different types of processes. Just think of the nanotechnology and emulsification for beverages alone. It's just a whole new world that we didn't even have 2 years ago in the way that we do today. And so this evolution becomes important. And I think Kathy touched on one last point that I want to make, and that is so much around getting your license to open up your cannabis business. Is around SOPs and documentation. And so oftentimes what happens is they're very quickly downloaded off the internet because, the World Wide Web is this amazing place that you can get anything. And it's a very different thing that Kathy mentioned from having something on paper and implementing it into a daily practice. And that's, I think, a lot of what we really care about in this conversation, is why there really is a process behind that and an education and something that doesn't get done once, but is continually getting updated, recreated, and checked on and verified. So I'm going to leave it at that and go ahead and hand off to David so he can tell about his story, because the three of us in this conversation, Kathy and David and I, have all been collaborating on these conversations for quite some time now. So it's pretty exciting that we're all together here.
Awesome. Thanks, Meryl, for the handover. And like I said, I think I'm super fortunate and privileged to be here as the only male in what really should be a representative, female dominant group here. So thank you again, Kathy and Meryl and the team, for bringing me here to speak. And my story is a little interesting. What I love about this space, I think we all do, we're here for passion, right? And we all come from a different background, and it's merging, it's a melting pot of cultures, right? Whether it's the analogies I'll use is you've got your investment banker from Wall Street, you've got your fifth generation grower from the Emerald Triangle, you've got your PhD out of Stanford, and then you've got a fourth one thrown into the mix, and you say, go make $30 million of product this year. Whoa, holy crap, how do you do that? We have 4 different languages here. What can we unify around? And GMPs As you know, when you look at Kathy Newton wrote a fantastic book about food safety, GMPs for the cannabis space, and I think at the end of chapter 4, she talks about, GMPs aren't optional in the rest of the world, right? When you look at your Honey Nut Cheerio box, you don't see GMPs on there. That's because that's the only way culture works there. That's the only way that, or maybe not the only way, to be so binary there, but that is the way that we have, as a world with 7 billion people on a population on this planet, have been able to reduce the risk to an acceptable level that we can produce products that reach hundreds of thousands to millions of people through a large-scale manufacturing process with reducing the risk of injury, adverse events, or worst-case death. And that's exactly what GMPs are here for. So as Kathy had mentioned, right, taking from the industries where these have been vetted from the 60s, right? HACCP, for example, you see that term. A lot of folks don't realize that Pillsbury helped create the HACCP program so that for NASA, so that we could put astronauts out in space safely and feed them food, right, and not injure them, and make sure they return safely. Where's my story? Where do I come from? So Masters of Science background, and did a lot of work in the ISO world and the EPA quality control testing world, and then the Department of Defense. And recognizing and kind of connecting with the cannabis industry, recognizing that, what are SOPs? Where do those come from? Oh, you hire a lawyer to do that? I like to say, and for better or for worse, the industry, the way we're regulated, has set us, a lot of businesses up for failure, essentially. And the idea that you write SOPs from theory, theory doesn't always meet reality, and we all know that. And taking SOPs and actually applying them, seeing how they work on the floor, making them usable and pragmatic, is really what we strive to do at the GMP Collective, and kind of as a partnership with all of the groups here on the table today, through training and education. And it's making these SOPs pragmatic so that your users on the floor can actually use them, because they're not there as just a nice dust collector. They're there to help ensure that things are repeatable, whether it's, Kathy's on first shift, Meryl's on second shift, and I'm on third shift. There's a standard way of doing things, and that's exactly what they're there for. And GMPs help you build quality into your systems so that by the time you get to final product testing, it's just a formality. Nobody wants to have 12% product failures from final product testing after you've put so much blood, sweat, tears, energy, passion, time, money into cultivation, propagation, veg, harvest, extraction, et cetera, only to find out that your products fail. So really, to bring that marriage of knowledge to the industry requires a full team integrated approach, and it's an educational process, and it's a cultural shift, but it's one that ensures the viability of the organization. There's so many benefits, risk reduction, et cetera. So I'm excited to be here, and I'll kind of turn it back over to the group for the next talking points.
During screens, I can unmute. Thanks, David. I'm back. Kathy, did you want to have any further discussion on the results from the first poll? We do have you're good with that? Just out of curiosity, I noticed a lot of people marked other, and several people chatted in about the ability to mark multiple boxes, because most of our industry does come from a variety of sectors. So if you want to chat some extra info in for what your background is, that'd be very helpful to our panelists in being able to streamline their questions and responses, more specifically to those who are attending, and do a little bit more detailed job in the future going forward. Up next, we do have, I think, a segment in talking about the lack of federal standards, or for that matter, the lack of harmonized state level requirements. And I've noticed through all the communications going back and forth, I think everybody seems to be aware that we're not going to go to a period of fewer regulations. At least in my years in the industry, we've never rolled back. So it's only going to be more and more involved, whether it's required now, required not. So I'll turn it back to maybe Kathy to disperse among the group, but in all, we start with for the first step of everything, which is knowing the intended consumer population that you're targeting and what your risk factors are there. So from there, Kathy, if you want to kind of expand on that, and we'll get the group involved.
Perfect. So I just had to double check if I'm on mute. So as a microbiologist, I will speak to you from that perspective, and the why behind we have all this regulation, and I think that certainly all my panelists and probably most of you in your careers understand that you cannot do enough education. You just don't have enough resources, you don't have enough time, and you always have people who want to understand why. Why do we have to do it this way? And so let me address that a little bit. Why do we worry about food safety? Why do we have to do that? Most of you in the industry, especially if you're in the edibles or extraction industry, edible making or extraction industry, you know that your sample, or I'm guessing most of the states are having you test for salmonella. So just for salmonella, in the food industry, there is an estimated 1 million cases every year. And we get that information from the CDC. And from that estimate of 1 million cases of the illness, there's a small percentage that have to go into the hospital, and an even smaller percentage that end up with death. But that is not true of other pathogens. So those of you who are in states where your product is being tested for STEC, that is pathogenic E. coli, there are a relatively small number of cases every year, but we have the potential of death from that pathogen at a much higher rate. And when I'm talking about relatively small in the United States from food, we estimate in the thousands. I didn't look up the exact numbers, but CDC has the exact estimates for us. And then the same is going to be true for a pathogen that I help prevent in the food industry a lot, which is Listeria Monocytogenes. And that's a pathogen that's just not on the cannabis industry radar yet. And so I'm putting it there. I put it on the industry. And it's the same story as with pathogenic E. coli, the STECs, that even though we're counting in the thousands for the number of people who become ill every year, the average mortality rate from a Listeria outbreak is close to 20%. And that does include infant mortality as well. And so we look to the seriousness of controlling pathogens. And then also we look to the seriousness of controlling allergens for the same reason, that if an allergen were to be in something that is consumed not labeled, and the consumer is allergic to that allergen, that could potentially be death. And then we have the concept of immunocompromised, and then Meryl, I'll have this jump over to you after I talk about immunocompromised for a minute. And so when you think about the food industry, or when you think about going to the grocery store to buy your groceries, all of the food that is in there primarily is in there for the general population. So the food industry, many industries, many companies don't have a huge emphasis on immunocompromised population. It would only be a matter of if they knew that their product was going to a particular populations, such as infant formula, toddler food that was being sold into food service, into hospital cafeterias, then they would know that they have an immunocompromised population. And so when we think about the immunocompromised population, that's exactly what the cannabis industry is selling to. On the food side, we look at an acronym, which is YOPI. It's the young, the old, the pregnant, and the immunocompromised. In the cannabis industry, We have a very, very small population of the young, of course, but there is the potential of the old, the pregnant, or the immunocompromised. The medical marijuana industry knows that the consumers of their product are immunocompromised. That is just by definition the role of the medical marijuana industry. But even as you look to adult use market and more states coming on board now, thank you Illinois, and thank you November elections, we can imagine that there would be adults who do not get the medical card and will just do self-consumption of a cannabis product to, especially in my age group, manage aches and pains. So I unfortunately don't live in a state that offers legal marijuana, but if I did, just for my normal aches and pains at this time in my life, I wouldn't necessarily have to go and get a medical card. I could just go and purchase for adult use. So even the adult use industry should be looking at that special population of immunocompromised, in addition to pain relief in my age category and above. There is also the category of people who are stressed. Is anybody stressed out there? So just being in a state of stress, which I would say almost everybody in the world is in right now because of the pandemic, that causes an immunocompromised situation in the body, a weakened immune system. And so bringing this full circle back to GMPs, taking edible safety seriously through the application of GMPs is so, so important for our consumers. All right, Meryl, everything else to you.
Wow, I think about what we talked about. Oh, Patricia.
I was just handing off to you.
I was just thinking about when we had our prep conversation and then what was just brought up, and I just, I'm going to have to digress from what I think we originally talked about, because I think one of the most important things here is that the challenge with not having a unified state-by-state program, it just focuses on one thing and one thing only, right? And so the only thing that carries state to state is concentrations of THC and CBD. Don't even look at anything else that could be there. And to the point around pesticides, mold, solvents, et cetera, all in the initial plant. Nothing about the entire life cycle of a product. And so this is where this whole conversation about manufacturing, and to Kathy's point, particularly if you think about today, if I purchase some kind of food in a grocery store, online, whatever, that packaging has a variety of information on there. It has ingredients, it has nutritional facts, it has if it's got a organic claim to it, it has a CL. If it says it is non-GMO, it has a CL. If it says it is gluten-free, it has a CL. And all of those things require the premise of this auditing practice that is good manufacturing, right? You have to be able to document and prove that I didn't just slap that, logo that I just pulled off the internet onto my box. I have to actually prove that I made that with integrity, and that I really can prove that all my ingredients are from a certified organic source, and are continually done because there's inspections around that. So this comes very back to that, because it's so crucial, particularly when we talk about an ingestible, because we don't have a clear onset offset. So if I say I have a headache and I want to take an aspirin, the bottle is going to tell me I'm going to take one or two, depending on my size, my age, my et cetera. Cannabis doesn't really have that. And because everybody's new to this, or even if they're heavily, been an active user for a good portion, the tolerance. So onset, offset, these are new words, and we have to be able to indicate to people what that is. And so when you get into the ingestibles, that becomes really significant. And we're just, again, at that beginning. A beverage is something that is easier to get in and out because you know it's going to come on quickly, right? It's going and absorbed. Anything that's going under the tongue and dissolving, sublinguals, tinctures, etc., pretty rapid onset. A baked, as you know, so many tell the story of that. Everybody has that experience, right? I had too much. I kept eating it. I didn't feel anything. So I ate more and more and more. And then I'm out cold, because that takes a lot longer to get into your system. A gummy is probably a little less. So all along that experience level is a variant in that. Now, if I go ahead and I talk about, I'm on a keto diet, am intolerant, and I don't know all those things. So it comes back to the label. Labeling is a big part of what the GMP thinks, and where we see, and at the end of the day, what all of this comes down to is money. And now I'm not talking about the investment money. I am talking about the money every time you have to recall or destroy a product. Every time you have to relabel something, every time, the loss is not just monetary, it's labor, it's product, it's time, it's efficiency, it's so much. And more importantly, it's a disruption in the marketplace, which is all around trust. And so I just, when we talk about how these things play out, they just all are tied together. And when you're not coming, when you're starting a new industry, we have to look to the experience of what we are talking about here today, because these are established guidelines. You do not see anything on a shelf in the grocery store that doesn't have, as I said, all of those indicators that can be validated and verified before it even got into the buyer's hands. And so, I still work with a lot of food and beverage companies in that. And so, we spend a lot of time, but label is not just about beauty, and it's not just about whatever the state regulatory is to validate that product. It's got to be the entire life cycle of that particular item and how it evolves over time. So I'm going to go ahead and push this back over into Trish and David's world of conversation in this, because I think I kind of just piggybacked off of what Kathy was starting.
No, and Meryl, thanks so much for doing that, because that's the intent of a discussion. We're not going to follow, we're not really following prescribed slides, but you brought out dosage and the way the product works, the brownie example. It's all really relevant in understanding the risks inherent to the product you make, whatever your product happens to be when it's an edible product. And I think I want to circle with David back to the role of GMPs and what that can do in building the proper foundation, because at the top of the pyramid, we saw the FSMA regulations, the 21 CFR 117, 111, depending on how you want to look at it, and what applies to your particular product. But the foundation of that relies on solid GMPs, or your risk assessment has to be adjusted. So David, let's see what, in terms of your experiences, the role they've played and what can happen when they don't do what they're supposed to.
Yeah, no, thanks, Patricia. And hopefully this builds on where we've been going and talking. And, there's this comment, I'm going to grab a book that I really want to show folks, because I believe it's Maggie up there that made the mention of cost of quality. And this is a book from 1979, Quality is Free. It's a really, fundamental book that I'm rereading, and a great advisor, a mentor of mine gave me. And the industry, the parallels are right there in terms of the industry where we're at in 2021 in cannabis, and recognizing that building quality into your system, which GMPs are a critical component of, is what allows you to scale and reproduce your products in a safe and consistent manner, right? And that's where GMPs come in. And right now, again, back to where the industry, where we are historically, as Meryl mentioned, THC and CBD, what's the concentration? What are the levels? That's what we're focused on. And we're also focused on diversion and compliance. And, that's a great start, but how does that protect consumer health and safety? And where do GMPs come in? There's mentions here, looking and kind of perusing the chats, trying to keep up with everything going on here. Some great discussions and questions and points. And, adult versus medical use. Well, as a producer, whether you're a cultivator, MIP, or what have you, who is your audience? Who are you producing for? And what are your product and what specifications do your products need to have? And you start there. And then you target what you want your output to be, and you build your controls, you build your SOPs, you build your systems to be able to meet that final end product, which then goes to the final product testing. And that, again, is the formality that your product meets whatever the label claim is that you're trying to state, whatever the concentration is, whatever the, whatever the impurities are or should not be in there. And GMPs provide that entire framework and memorialization with data and records to prove behind it, to show that you have done what you established to do. And when things go wrong, because we're all humans, we live in a world of humans where we all make mistakes, and even the equipment that's automated, a human built that or produced that or designed it or programmed it. So again, a human was involved there, and mistakes will happen. Do you have a system to document the out of specifications, the non-conformances, the deviations, so that you can understand what kind of impact that could have on your product, and then so you can prevent that from happening again, right? That's another fundamental of a GMP and a quality system. So all these really drive so much value to your bottom and top line as a business, that back to, it's fundamental in every other industry, from edible, food safety, pharma, dietary supplements. I think there's a couple folks in the medical device world, and to bring that, merge that into cannabis is it sounds like a lot, and it certainly is. Any change is hard, but it's the key to business success. And when you look at companies that are multi-state operators that are producing, across multiple states, well, every state has its own differences, and that's, part of the issues we're all here struggling with. But when you overlay an element of GMPs with HACCPs and risk assessments, you can transfer that across from Florida to Massachusetts to Arizona to Colorado to California as a corporate culture. Or even if you're in, say, one state in Colorado and you've got your Fort Collins and your Pueblo facility, don't you want things operating in the same manner, using the same metrics to be able to drive and understand at a top level management, or even down to the bottom, or the frontline workers, that you're doing things consistently and reproducibly, and that you can compare and improve as an organization and make sure that your products are as safe and top-notch as possible. And again, that's where the memorialization, going through the risk assessments and doing all of the practices and implementing all of the programs in GMPs allow you to do that. So I think that hopefully built up off of what you were saying there, Patricia, and asking. If I missed any questions there, anything more pointed, holler back at me. But I know we're getting to the end here, so I want to make sure I shush and let other folks chime in, and then turn to the Q&A, I guess.
Well, that's the reason they brought me in, is to wrangle we can all talk forever. I'm biting my own tongue. I'm trying not to hop in myself. But we're going to have another poll question come up briefly. But currently, I want to jump over to the next segment, which is the lack of federal regulation, federal standards. I live in Florida. I happen to know our Florida law requires a GMP certification, and there wasn't one when they wrote the law. So it really put folks in the industry down here in a whirlwind, because how do you get audited and certified to a standard that doesn't exist? But we'll kick that topic off in terms of the lack of harmonized regulation, and kind of some cues that are coming across from the state level, and the existence now, I believe, of a scheme that's coming up. Kathy, I'll start with you, and then you can hand off down the line. You're on mute.
Yeah.
Really?
I just figured that out.
There you go. All right. Thanks, Kathy.
So certainly we have differences among our states. It's extremely frustrating. There was a question that I just answered from the chat Q&A about when are we going to see federal regulation. We really don't know. We expect that the incoming administration is going to be much more conducive to pushing through and approving cannabis/marijuana regulation at the federal level, but there's no timeline for that yet. And I'm going to let Meryl and Dave, oh, on my screen that way, Meryl and Dave jump in and talk more about that.
Yeah, Meryl, I'll jump in then. So, the point that what is federal legalization going to do? I think we could all, go to the gambling ring and throw our $20 down, and there's maybe some odds on certain things happening over others, but essentially, we stand at a very unique opportunity as an industry, and we have 36 plus states now with some sort of program. That's more than 2/3 of the states. And, as this comes down to a states' rights issue and the feds have, dragged their feet for one reason or another, this politics aside, what can we do as an industry to prepare? Because the dietary supplements, the cosmetics industry, the cotton industry, there are lots of parallels to show where, I like to use the word from a colleague, entrepreneurial regulations, and how can we show that we're standing ahead of the curve? And two groups come to mind. One is ASTM International, and that's a 120-year-old standards development organization. I'm an officer and dedicated volunteer on a couple of their committees. The D37 Committee on Cannabis has been around since 2017 with 1,000 members across 30 countries. Jamaica has adopted their standards. There's folks from, say, Health Canada, multiple state government entities, the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, and again, another 28 countries that are involved in this consensus standards development process. And by developing consensus standards that we can all adhere to, that can be GMPs for cannabis, we can show and put our foot forward and say, hey, we understand we've translated dietary food as applicable into the cannabis industry, and here's how we're meeting it. And I think that's a really important takeaway for folks to, kind of get on the train and do it for brand awareness, do it for the health, and do it for the integrity of your business to reduce the risk of a recall, because those are, especially for small companies, that's basically business suicide right there. The cost of a recall is not just the product that's recalled, it's the brand integrity, it's the collateral that comes out of that, it's the it's all those costs, and worst case scenario, it's the cost of having to handle illnesses and adverse events from the people that consumed your product. There's a big difference between baking brownies for your friends and family at Thanksgiving versus baking it for hundreds of thousands of people, and that's where the risk is higher and the controls must be much higher, and that's exactly where GMPs come in. So, making sure that we're prepared for a GMP because again, as Kathy mentioned at the beginning, we can steal and take from other industries where it's parallel, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So let's utilize the best practices that are right in front of our faces, that have been vetted and proved that there's no evidence that the FDA would ever go in a different manner.
Hey, David,
this is
Meryl, if you
okay.
want to add.
Oh, sorry. This is Kathy. I just wanted to let everybody know I give go ahead for launching the poll question because of just the time that we're at, in case anybody has to leave at the top of the hour. And then after you answer the poll question, there are resources here. There was a question in the Q&A about some resources.
Perfect. And we're going to give this about 15, 20 seconds to get those responses in from the audience. Like I mentioned in the chat window, and Kathy just pointed out, we are getting close to the end of the allotted hour, but do know that we're not going to cut off our esteemed panelists and this amazing topic. So if you all are available to stick around for our moderated Q&A session after we hit the 12 o'clock hour, feel free to stick on and we'll continue the session at 15-minute intervals from there. All right, Brooke, I think that we probably got enough time for that poll. Let's share the results and dive right back into the panel.
So yeah, while we're waiting for that, let me just kind of close out what David was saying and Kathy. I think, what we'll be lucky to see two major things relatively quickly over the next 18 to 24 months, and one being decriminalization and the second being banking. With our economy in such turmoil right now, states are looking for this new sources of income. And when they gave us this gift of making cannabis an essential business and really seeing it really be something that for the general public to right now point to rather than alcohol, it really kind of pushed it up further. And we also know that with so many first-time voters that came in during this election cycle, this is a big topic for them, and it ties into, so it really is an economic, it's a job creator. It is, it's good for the public. It's good for communities. It's just going to take us time. So as we, David touched on this, but we're all participating in different studies. We're working with the labs to try to get beyond ISO and really help identify 3 to 4 standards for testing solutions all along, again, the life cycle of products, because it's such a variant. And again, for labs that just came into cannabis that didn't have backgrounds in food, beverage, pharmaceutical, and nutraceutical, it's just been a bigger challenge for them, right? Because they all have the same equipment, but they don't necessarily have all the same protocols and processes that are often proprietary, and how to handle these different things. And when you get into the whole low dose world, that's a whole nother thing, including the word dose, right? Because that even is problematic. So we are opening a can of worms, and I'm going to turn this back over because we have the last results of the poll, and I know that we want to lead into that last part of this conversation.
Thanks, Meryl. As you can see, the results are up, and I will leave that to you folks on the panel to discuss. But I wanted to point out that this dovetails so nicely into the last topic on the agenda, which is tying the challenges that the attendees and listeners are facing with the tools and resources to document the plans, and noticing that training hit the high mark here, and that so many of your educators on there, I just think it launches the perfect next segment of the topic. And from there, Kathy, I'll let you start off and direct how you want to cover the results and the resources, with training being the key. Unmute, Kathy. You're still muted. You're still muted.
Oh yeah. All right.
There
You're right.
you are.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, I was responding to one of our questions. So for our resources, we look to ImEPIK, who has an 100% online course, and the cannabis side of it is actually part 1 and part 2. So part 1 covers GMPs and includes the pyramid of edible safety, which I reviewed with you today. That would be suitable for literally everyone in the cannabis industry, and it was designed that way. Then for our department heads, our quality assurance managers, the people who have more supervisory responsibilities in their job duties, there is level 2, which is the edible safety plan. And on the food safety side of it, those of you who come from the food manufacturing industry, you are probably familiar with the term PCQI. That's been around for 10 years, since the Food Safety Modernization Act was signed by President Obama. And that is an acronym which means Preventive Controls Qualified Individual. And in the food industry, every facility must have someone certified, not certified, but trained, excuse me, to be a Preventive Controls Qualified individual. And so for the cannabis industry, we don't really know where FDA is going to go with this. And so we've designed the curriculum to handle those. I will have Meryl talk about the resources that Trace Trust has, and I believe S Global is who she is working with as well. And I'll have Dave go and explain the resources that are available at GMP Collective. So there was literally a question to the panelists of what resources are there to learn more about the cannabis industry, learn more about GMPs in the cannabis industry. So we've built that in and can answer that question. And then there also was a question that I want to address real quickly, which is, when you come to the cannabis industry with your skill set, how do you get a job in the cannabis industry? And my response to people who ask me that, because lots of people ask me that, is, how do you get a job in your industry? It's the same. The skill set that you have is exactly the skill set that the cannabis industry needs as well. No matter what part of operations you come from, no matter what part of seed to sale you come from, you are needed in the cannabis industry. If you're not already in the cannabis industry, I highly encourage you to look for jobs of yours that include your skill set so that you can come and join us with all the fun. So Dave, why don't we jump to you for the GMP Collective, and then Meryl.
Sure. Thanks, Kathy. I'm sitting here trying to type away and respond to some of the great questions in the chat as well. So I know we'll get through all these, and we are over time, but thanks to everybody for sticking around. So one of the programs we just launched is an integrated CAPA and recall program, and CAPA, another acronym, corrective action, preventive action. And one of the biggest things that I like about this is that when done correctly and effectively, it's a system for identification of your issues, conducting a root cause investigation, a true investigation to get what is the root cause, not just it's retraining or somebody wasn't made aware, but what is the true systemic issue within your company? Are you missing an environmental monitoring program? Do you have no data to assert what you're doing is working or not working? And then coming up with preventive solutions that you can then monitor the effectiveness of. And when you really build a robust CAP program, that allows you to build out your entire GMP program, because it's a lot to bite off. You don't want to take the whole elephant but one step at a time. So that's one of our major programs. But in general, we can provide solutions in terms of technical writing, SOP development and implementation support, and other informal trainings that where say you can partner with, say, ImEPIK as well, especially on the here's the fundamental training that you need. We can help with the specialized, customized, one-off training. So we offer a lot of solutions. Check out our website, and it's really been a pleasure to be here with everybody. So thank you for that call out, Kathy. Meryl?
So yeah, thank you. So just real quick, so STS Global Services has been in the agriculture, food, and beverage world for a long time, and we have been working with them for a number of years. And so one of the things is that we wrote their cannabis and hemp HACCP training programs. These are now offered online. They're offered both individually and for groups in the same way. But I also want to talk about one of the initiatives that Trace Trust has launched and will be really coming out in the beginning of February. So in addition to Rhiannon, my co-founder and our CSO, is we have two other great people on our team. And one is Lydia Abernathy, who is on this call and is part of the education committee with Kathy at NCIA, and also Colleen King, who comes from the coffee world, but is an amazing supply chain expert. And all of us have come into this world, as I said, from other industries, but with extensive backgrounds in science and production. And so we have created a series of microlearning. They are short. They are under 45 minutes. They are either knowledge-based or skill-based, but they're very much geared towards giving you the next level. And if you take a series, you get the entire component of that. So you are certified at the end with some skill set. And so, the example is cultivation, particularly for states that have just gotten legal access. The first course is just on the basics of cultivation, but also identifying a facility and where you're going to create a grow operation. And from that grow operation is then gets into specifics around genetics and plants and implementing GMPs. Supply chain, same thing. How do I create that supply chain? How do I build it? How do I look for reputable partners in that? The manufacturing, tying into a lot of what we're talking about here. But we work a lot of people with formulation. How do I create something from the ground up to not only work in a state, but carry over state to state to build out my brand? And then risk management. So again, we touch a lot on all of this coming down to product liability, but also it covers into your workman's comp and your production plan. And as you allocate resources, training has to be thought of. I've been saying this for my entire adult career, but training is a utility, right? Just as much as you pay your electric bill, you need to pay, invest in your training from the beginning of onboarding and how you select people to come to work for you, but how do you provide them and grow them over time? And that is the crucial part of this, because with having people coming in with great experience, you want to be able to keep them, but you also want to be able to leverage that experience. And so I think the other last part I want to just close with here is, I think, having this panel here today really demonstrates our collaborative efforts. All of us do very similar things, but it is not competitive as it is so much about how do we work together, all ships rising together and really building out an amazing industry that we see that will only grow and improve over time. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Meryl. And I kind of like David, multitasking here where you're talking and typing and trying to watch and then you hear the verbal cue of, and thank you, I'm going, uh-oh, I'm in 5 screens here. No, I think I want to thank all the panelists and thank NCIA for hosting the session. I think it's been great. Now, I will put to Kathy and to Brian, we have some questions in the Q&A box we can address. I know we've kind of eked over the top of the hour, but that we've also indicated that we might keep going a little bit. So Kathy, your call. Brian, your call.
Yeah, definitely. We can accommodate the request to extend the panel as needed. I have gotten a notice from David that he does have another appointment that he has to get to shortly. So we're going to advance to the contact info slide now. Just a heads up to all the audience members that might have to leave as well. We will be sending the contact information directly to all of you all via email post-session, along with a formatted video recording of today's session. So if you do have to drop off, please do make use of that, and then stay on the lookout on your inbox for some resources to do some follow-up questions if you need to. And since David has to leave, if we're going to address a few more of the questions in the Q&A, that's totally fine. But I want to give David the opportunity to leave us with a final thought, since he's been a great addition to this panel throughout the hour.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. My final thought, I think, just reiterates what we've been talking about, which I guess as it should. And, there's the contact information here. And my recommendation to folks, go get training. Go sign up for the ImEPIK training, get your whole team there, and just get a baseline understanding of what we're talking about, take it to the next level, so that you can reduce what I like, what we commonly refer to as the unknown unknowns, right? You don't know what you don't know. And we all suffer from this as humans. So this is something that's coming. This is something that benefits your business. Go get those questions answered in a group setting with your team, and then call any one of or all of us because we all provide different complementary skill sets. And there's reasons why maybe Meryl's a fit for certain people and David's a fit for others, or Kathy or maybe it's a combination of all the above. And there's so much need and value that we can all offer. That I'm just glad to be here. And again, my takeaway is go continue to educate yourself and your team, and you'll never regret an investment in yourself. So thanks again, everybody. Oh, Brian, you're muted.
Whoops.
But I see some.
Yeah, fantastic takeaway from the session, David. I don't think that we could leave the audience with any better advice. So thank you for passing that along and joining us for today's panel. Trish, I'll turn it back over to you to moderate the Q&A session with our remaining panelists. So feel free to dive into any questions that you think are particularly worthwhile and drive the conversation where we want to see it for the last 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I'm just 1 second. I'm going to pull it up some of the questions, and I'm going to. There's a couple in here regarding universities and other things that I'm sure Kathy would have some points on that, and we'll select others. I do want to point out one thing from my perspective, mostly food, but relatively aware of what's going on with cannabis. Be very grateful that you actually have the online training option, and that by getting ahead of the curve, you actually can establish the requirements that are met for training through that. Understand that FDA and FSMA did not initially allow online training at all. They do it reluctantly now, and it's great to see the entire cannabis sector start off with the awareness that we can do great training online. We don't have to fly people around, and we can't even do that right now. But that's an added bonus. I just wanted to throw that in. And Kathy, I'll put the university question to you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I am unmute. So it was one of my things that I wanted to get into the program if there was an opportunity, and that is the work of the NCIA Education Committee. Meryl was our first fearless leader. So she started us off in October of 2019 was when the Education Committee first formed. But we have 2 major initiatives that I want everybody to be really well informed about. We are doing a lot of, and I saw Lydia was on as well. Shout out to Lydia. We are doing a lot of inter-committee work, working with the different committees of NCIA and how Education Committee can get intertwined with them. And it's been extremely rewarding to see the growth. But 2 things. First of all, NCIA is going to have a speakers bureau. So we are looking first for NCIA members who we all know to be good speakers, and it can be on any topic. So anything in the cannabis industry at all. And then as NCIA members, whenever we are looking for a speaker or we need someone with a particular expertise, that Speakers Bureau information will be available to members. The second thing, which started during Meryl's time last term, was a database of educational offerings in cannabis. So we are receiving, right now we're just on the receiving end. We probably will not have an active database in NCIA until next term. Terms start in like September through August. So we won't be looking at this term, but next term for somewhat of a functional database. So right now we are looking for those one-off courses where there's continuing education units, the university programs. I've been involved with the Community College of Denver. They have a cannabis program. We're looking for, what was I going to say? Like associate degree programs for the cannabis industry, supporting the cannabis industry. So as you hear about those, please reach out to the Education Committee of NCIA, and you can find our contact information on the NCIA webpage for the Education Committee.
I'm just going to add one last thing, because one of the great parts of what has evolved from that original work is the fact that it really is all aspects. It's not just the manufacturing and the food part that we've talked about, but it's everything from business, finance, risk management. I mean, it really encompasses these learning modules throughout
business
the
approach.
process. Exactly. So
Mhm.
pretty exciting on that end, and comprehensive, and having a national list of resources is going to be fantastic.
I know from experience in the food industry, this is one of the reasons I picked this question. There are few, if any, academic tracks for a advanced degree in food safety. They've only recently been around, like in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. When I first started with this, you literally could not get an academic degree in food safety. You could get, other food technology, but that's building a pizza crust that can be frozen and then will still rise. That's not food safety. When you're talking about an edible safety, so the only thing I would add to that is fundamental chemistry, fundamental microbiology. These are the basics that will always help you throughout. But it is the training experts such as ImEPIK and the others, David's group and so forth, and Meryl's group, that really drive the training for the entire industry, at least for the foreseeable future. We have time for maybe another 1 or 2 questions. So let's go through the list and see. I want to get back to some of the on the training. How would they document? Let's talk about training compliance real quick, because you can take the course, but as part of your GMPs and your plan and your documentation, is a certificate enough? Do they need refresher hours? Those kind of things. Does anybody want to touch on that? Okay, I've literally talked you quiet.
I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, we're just getting first run people
Right.
to get qualified, let alone second round of requalifying them. So I think it's like everything else.
Walk
Let's
before
see
you
where we're
can
at
run.
a year from now.
Understood. But for the attendees, it is certainly something to bear in mind that you want to document. Kathy hit on continuing education credits. And even documenting attending webinars such as this add value to that, staying up with emerging issues, following regulatory issues. But I think if, starting with Kathy, if you want to take and move to Meryl, since Dave's already gone, if you want to take a minute or two and share some closing thoughts for the session, we will put the first one in the books.
Very good. Yes, thank you. Thanks to all of our panelists coming together today. I really appreciate it. When I look at getting the word out as an educator, it's not just a one-time deal. It's getting the word out about edible safety, particularly, is where my interest is. So through lots of different media. So I have the book, I have webinars, I have papers published, those kinds of things. And so I hope that people in the cannabis industry will be searching and finding that information, and that they'll start to see it over and over and over again. And we have gone, in my short time in the cannabis industry, we have gone from the point of what is a GMP to the point of how do I apply GMPs. And now we're at the threshold of, oh my, everybody needs to be GMP compliant. In the food industry, and I know we say that phrase a lot, and I apologize for that, but what we say in the food industry is that food safety is not competitive. So today, opening up by saying that GMP compliance is not optional, I can springboard and go to the point of food safety. Edible safety is not competitive. We are all in this together, and we want to share resources. I was so happy to see those questions about looking for more resources. I've met so many people in the cannabis industry who just devour information as they find it and want to have more information. And so I'm very encouraged. I'm very encouraged. And so maybe this will be the last webinar where we have to say GMPs are not an option. That would be nice.
Well said. Well said. Kathy, Meryl, your last thoughts?
Thank you again. This is such a timely conversation, and I just really appreciate NCIA really putting together these essential moments for us to really dive into some of these topics a little bit more comprehensively. And we are seeing such an evolution, such a rapid pace of change in this. And I think that I hope the big takeaway here is no matter what your background and experience is, there is a place for you in this industry, and that it is also very much inclusive and really diverse. And that is something that you never see in new things very much, but there is there's a concerted effort here to really make sure that from the legacy people to those that are still serving time for small amounts of marijuana, to the future of how we are and what we create is going to be exciting, and it's just it's really fascinating, but it's also going to be amazing on so many levels. So thank you again.
And with that, I think, Brian, we can say that the session is closed for now. I'll kick it back over to you. And thank you again. It was an honor to moderate. I didn't have to do a lot, just tell you to turn your mics on, and off you went. So great panel. Really, really glad. Brian?
Perfect. Well, don't sell yourself short, Trish. You helped drive the conversation exactly where it needed to be. So thank you so much for contributing to today's session as a moderator. And a huge thank you to all of our panelists. I'm sharing the contact info slide for any of you all that might not have snagged that information when we shared it initially. We're going to transition into the outro of today's session as always. So stick around for the next 2 or 3 minutes while we give you a heads up of some upcoming activities underneath the NCIA umbrella. And thank you all for your participation in today's panel. Again, as I mentioned, you will all receive a PDF version of today's presentation, which includes those 2 resource slides that the panel expanded upon, as well as clickable links inside this contact information slide. So you can directly follow up via email and connect with all of the panelists via their various social media handles and LinkedIn pages. With that, all of our panelists can leave the virtual stage for the next 2 or 3 minutes, but they'll be sticking around within the chat window. So make sure to pass along any of those final questions, thoughts, or remarks to the panelists directly there. All right, perfect. And before we let you all go, a huge thank you to the team at ImEPIK for sponsoring and presenting today's session. ImEPIK is a market-driven and research-based online training company which facilitates food safety training for food manufacturers around the world, with an emphasis on accessible and innovative training, as all of you all saw firsthand today. ImEPIK offers a unique advantage in providing effective training for you, your employees, your association members, or your clients to ensure food safety compliance and best practices. Learn more by following the links to their website listed here, or reaching out to either Catherine, Kathy, or any of the other ImEPIK team members which presented in today's session. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. A huge thank you to our panelists, audience members, and member businesses which make our work possible each and every day. You'll all be directed to a short 5-question attendee survey after leaving the meeting room. Please complete that immediately to gain access to our presentation. And do note that all NCIA members receive exclusive 30-day access to formatted video recordings of all of our Industry Essentials educational webinars, first posted in our members-only community platform, NCIA Connect. However, since this is a service solution session, we don't want to delay our publication of the content. So stay on the lookout for this session to be posted first to our YouTube page and added to our webinar archive on our website this week, in addition to being sent directly to you all via email. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time for another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. We have a member-only edition of our Fireside Chat series taking place later this month, so head to our website to learn more about that today. As always, we'll leave you all with this end-of-event credit sequence highlighting the 45 plus member businesses that participated in this afternoon's session. Huge thank you to all of you all. As always, we'll showcase some audio stylings by the resident musician at our Colorado-based in-person events, KJ Liz, and his Illinois-based musical side project, Indigo Sun. Enjoy, and we'll see you all later next week.